Perfect. All right, so good evening. President Magana, Associate Superintendent Bejarano, and board. We are very excited to be here. My name is Seth Reddy. I'm the Director of Special Education, and we'll be giving you an update on special education tonight. I brought with me a team of phenomenal people. Number one, because I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me, but number two, because these are the folks who do the important and hard work directly with our students, and I really want them to share with all of you their experiences and their work that they've done. So I'm going to introduce everybody. You'll hear from them throughout the presentation, but just going down the line, this is Chris Metcalf, one of the managers on our team. Next is Amy D'Addario, another of the managers on our team. Not here tonight is our third manager, Megan, who unfortunately has COVID and can't make it tonight, but she gives her regards. And then we have Dr. Carla Copeland, who's our school psychologist at Pioneer High School. And at the end, Mr. Richel Dapudong, who is a teacher, RSP teacher at Willow Glen Middle School. All right, so. Oh, went too far, a little bit of a delay. All right, so you're going to hear from these folks tonight, but I do also want to just take a moment to thank all of the staff, the site administrators, the paraprofessionals, the teachers, the school psychologists that worked tirelessly this year and will continue for the next several weeks until the end of this school year, serving our students and our families. I also want to thank the board for giving us this opportunity. This is not the norm in all school districts, and I have the honor to present each year to all of you. And that really shows your commitment to our students with disabilities and their families, which make up about 13% of our student body. And so I'm excited to share with you tonight a few things. First, last year I showed you this exact same slide where we set as a team targets for 3 years. And so we are in year 2 of this. And I'm first going to walk you through an update on each of these items. And I want to just point out that the data is obviously really important, but there are a lot of factors that influence student achievement in our system. And there's a lot of factors that influence the data that you're going to see here. I think the second half of the presentation is equally, if not more important, which is where we'll talk about what we said we were going to do and what we did do this school year. And I also want to note too that this data is from 21-22, because many of our indicators are lagging, with the exception of one, which I'll point out. And we are still coming out of the pandemic. And so I think there's some context around some of this data. And while definitely none of us are satisfied with where we are, because obviously if we were, we wouldn't be doing this work. There are some reasons to be optimistic that we didn't see regression that we think we might have expected when we first came out of the pandemic. And so I'm going to run through each of these briefly, and certainly at the end, there'll be plenty of time for comments, but I am eager to get to all these great people here sharing with you. But to start, our first goal was to increase the graduation rate for SWD, which is students with disabilities, so I'll use that nomenclature, at our comprehensive school sites, so our high schools except Liberty and Broadway, to 90%. And so last year we were at 84% across those school sites. And this year we are at 83.6%. So we've maintained about even there. You'll see that this rate doesn't match that because this is the officially published rate on DataQuest, the state system. So this includes Liberty and Broadway. But I wanted to give you this context just to show that San Jose Unified is above the county and state level, but pretty much maintaining flat. And I know these are the years with the pandemic, like I said, and so certainly we are eager to influence those. But there is, like I said, some reason to be optimistic that we didn't see more regression with these numbers. Now this is a kind of crazy slide with these lines. So I think what I want you to take from here is that you can see that all of our schools for the last 3 years really stay within that 80 to 100% band. You also have to know that the N of students each year is pretty small at each school site. So overall it's 259 students. And so at each school you're looking at anywhere from 25 to 35 to 40 students. And so there can be big swings in these numbers with just a few students being different. And so obviously what you might look at here and think is, what's going on at Leland and Gunderson, which is obviously something we thought about as well. And so I just wanted to point out a little quirk in the way that this rate is calculated because it gives some important context. One of the groups of students that are considered non-grads under the state system are students who are on a certificate of completion track. So those are students who matriculate to our post-secondary program at ACE. But they are counted as non-grads at these schools. And Leland and Gunderson have 2 of our programs that often have many students on the certificate of completion track. So if you look specifically at the data for those two schools,
I'm in suspense.
you can see that the blue represents students with IEPs that graduated. The green represents, for this past year, students who were on a certificate of completion. So when you total those together, those two schools also fall into that 80 to 100% band that we were looking at with the previous schools. And so obviously, like I said, there's work to be done still, but that's an important context to take in. So I think we're excited to continue the work we're doing to influence this rate as we go forward. Next, we wanted to, I think if you remember from last school year, when we looked at the overall graduation rate, we split it out for our alternative schools and saw that, unsurprisingly, our alternative schools had a much lower graduation rate for our students with disabilities, as it also does for our students without disabilities by nature of this population that they serve. And we set the goal to have in 3 years that 75% of the students at those schools would be graduating. And so we're definitely excited about some of the progress we've made this school year. Again, these numbers, the N for these schools is small. It's a small cohort each year. But we've increased our average from 36% to 46%, with a big increase at Liberty. And we won't talk specifically about some of the work we've done at Broadway tonight, but we are really excited about that and expecting that that's a payoff over the next 2 years based on some of the changes that Chris specifically and his team have implemented there. Our next rate was about post-secondary preparation measured through A through G eligibility, which is students meeting certain criteria that I won't go into because it is quite lengthy, to indicate their preparedness for life after high school. And so you can see that this has definitely held flat over the course of the 3 years, and I think, transparently, we're still looking at what are the levers we can really pull for this, because there are some things right now that definitely cause students to not be A through G eligible that we need to figure out how to best support students in achieving that to the maximum extent that they can. However, again, in the context of COVID, I think we're optimistic that this didn't regress any further, and excited to continue to work on this moving forward. So our last two, the first is to increase the percentage of our students with IEPs that are meeting or exceeding standard on the math and ELA SBAC, which is the state test, to 25%. These numbers for 21-22 do need to be interpreted with caution, as I think Director Hewitt said when he shared the numbers overall for our district. Less students than usual took this test, and so it's not as, I think, robust as possibly previous years. But still, given the pandemic, we were surprised, and not necessarily in a good way because these numbers still aren't where we want them to be, but we were surprised that there was growth. I think that's a testament to a lot of the work that our teachers obviously did and some of the initiatives we'll talk about tonight. And then finally, you've already heard from Director Murphy back in the fall about our human resources, but that is a huge part of the work we do in special education. There are a lot of positions to fill, given that the student-to-teacher ratio is smaller, and we have a lot of folks like Dr. Copeland and our other service providers that we need to staff. And it is still probably the most significant challenge that we face as a department in working with our students. Myself, Chris, Amy, the entire team in HR, we spend a significant amount of time staffing positions each school year, not just at the start, but throughout the school year as there are leaves, as there are absences, as there are people who decide to move out of the area. But we were really, really happy with where we started the first day of school here. I take a lot of pride in those last two numbers. That is the result of hours and hours of interviews by Chris, Amy, Megan, and our team in getting those positions staffed. So we started the year pretty well. You can see that instructional associates is still a difficult position to fill. That puts a lot of strain on the system, site administrators and teachers. But one thing to point out that we're still relying on is contractors to fill the gaps that we have. And so this next slide shows you what those numbers drop to if we factor out the contractors that we bring in to plug the gaps that we have. And so while things have definitely improved slightly, for example, last year our school psychologists, 34% of them were district employees. We're up to almost half. And special education related service providers, speech language pathologists, positions like that, we're up from about 50% to 62%. There is still a significant amount of work we do with contract agencies to fill our positions. And so I think our district has done a fantastic job with differentiating the salary with this latest collective bargaining agreement for our special education employees. And we're hoping that that will continue to pay dividends as we move forward. Excellent. All right, so now we're going to get to the more interesting part, which is to hear about the work that we've done. And so we've grouped the initiatives that we've focused on this past year, this year, and then heading into the future as well into three big categories. The first of which is ensuring that we are serving our students in the least restrictive environment in a very intentional and strategic way. And so I'm going to turn it over, and I should say too, with this update, I'm going to focus on depth and not breadth. I want you to hear about some very specific initiatives. We are definitely doing more in each of these areas that you'll hear about tonight, but I wanted you to hear specifically about some of the great work that we're doing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Taddario to talk about the work she's been doing in our early education space in least restrictive environment.
Thank you. So research indicates that there are numerous benefits for students with disabilities who are served in classrooms alongside their typically developing peers. Previously in San Jose Unified, a large number of students who were placed in segregated special education classrooms in preschool remained in those classrooms when they transitioned to elementary school. We implemented a process to really look closely at those placements when the students transition to transitional kindergarten to move them to less restrictive environments if appropriate. Also, to ensure that students with disabilities in preschool are prepared for success in a general education classroom, we implemented a resource program for 3-year-olds that focuses on classroom readiness. This provides a least restrictive environment for students to practice expected behaviors for circle time, transitioning, and other necessary skills. In addition to this, we phased out the non-categorical segregated special day class program for transitional kindergarten students and are now providing a dedicated transitional kindergarten and kindergarten resource specialist to support students with disabilities attending a general education TK or kindergarten classroom.
And just wanted to share, one data point related to that. So the state each year in the October data that we send them calculates the distribution of our students based on their percentage in general education. So what this is showing is the blue bar there is students who spend less than 40% of their time in general education. Green is 40 to 80, red is 80, so what we, greater than 80, so what we want to see is that red bar growing each year, right? And so you can see that even with just the first year of a lot of these changes, we've already made some progress in that area, and we're looking forward to monitoring that going forward as well. All right, excellent. So I'm going to fill in for Ms. Wood and talk just briefly about one thing that you heard last year, which was at our middle school schools that had special day class programs, so segregated programs. Previously, students who attended those programs typically took science and social sciences in that setting with other peers in special education. There were a lot of reasons why that was challenging for the teachers. They often had students in 3 grade levels. They were teaching that curriculum in addition to math and English. And so what we did this year was have those students be served in the general education grade level science or social science class with a special education teacher and instructional associate pushing in to provide that support. And I will say that this is probably the initiative that has been the most challenging. I think there's a lot of lessons still to be learned, but 3 in particular stood out. The first is that we recognized, I think about halfway through this year, that the approach for each of our schools actually needed to be a lot different than we thought. The population at Bret Harte, for example, the general education class there, just had different needs and the students needed different support than a class at Mahaloni Middle School. And so we realized that we need to tailor how we prepare those teachers specifically for the communities in which they work. The second is that we need to be intentional with our collaboration and also provide structured collaboration for the general education teachers and the special education teachers by building overlapping prep periods in, by providing very structured guides on what they can work on together to get the best outcomes for our students. And last, definitely not a surprise, but a lesson we learned, even though we were expecting it, is that there's never enough professional development for people. And so to continue offering professional development in things like universal design for learning, accessibility, and how to help those students access the curriculum when they may have deficits in certain skills that are expected to be there in that curriculum. All right, so next, we've talked a little bit about the targeted intervention, so just a brief recap. Our theory is that our students will make progress if the curriculum they receive, the interventions they receive in their special education programs are tailored very tightly to their needs as represented on their IEPs. And so a lot of that work started and is still happening in our middle school resource programs. And so we have introduced two specific curriculums there. One is a structured literacy program. If you remember way back in the spring, you heard from Ms. Chen at Hoover Middle School. And tonight you're going to hear about the other curriculum, which is one that we developed in-house. And Mr. Dabudong and Chris as well played a big role in developing that curriculum. And he's actually teaching it as well. So he's going to share a little bit about you with Think, Lead, Create, which we call the TL2C curriculum.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here and be able to share feedback on our TL2C curriculum. As a bridge to high school and adult life, this TL2C class concentrates on building capacity in areas needed for long-term growth and progress. The TL2C curriculum was developed based on the research and evidence-based programs such as the SMARTS. Second step, we have Common Sense Education and Typing.com. And the TL2C course or class supports our students through the provision of at least 120 minutes per week of direct instruction, supporting them with their academic skills, social emotional learning needs, executive functioning, as well as using assistive technology to support their learning. I've been using this curriculum for 2 years now, and I have seen positive impact or positive outcomes for our students. And this year during IEP meetings, I have heard a lot of success stories and positive feedback from our families. And one of those success stories I've heard is that, when I met this parent last year, like she was so hopeless. And then this year when we had the IEP meeting, she said that, for 6 years, this is our first time to experience success with our child. And, when our child gets home, she would just go straight to her bedroom and do the work, which we never, experienced before. And so many other, parents talked about the program as well. And 4 of the students exited the TL2C program this year, and 1 exited the special education program. So I think for me that is an achievement. And in order to improve how we use this curriculum moving forward, in order to support student development, I think we need to regularly review and update our curriculum to ensure that it remains relevant and aligned with the needs of our students. We will continue to provide ongoing professional development for teachers to just help them gain more knowledge of the curriculum and support them to implement the curriculum with confidence, and also to incorporate feedback from our students, teachers, and parents in identifying areas of need for improvement. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about our case management model, one of our big pieces in role innovation.
All right, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time today. I'll be talking about our current case management programs and the current sites that they're at. I'll start with the high schools is Abraham Lincoln High School, San Jose High, Gunderson, and Pioneer. At the middle schools, we have it at Ohlone, we have it at Hoover, we've got it at John Muir, Castillero, and Brett Hart. And we extended it into the elementary schools to Willow Glen Elementary, Trace, and Baccarat. Kind of the purpose behind the case management program has been that, it was based on this thought that the district and the school site special education team has this interest in developing closer relationships with our families, plural, by providing a higher quality IEP and more focused, specialized academic instruction. Separating the teaching from the case management duties would allow one person on site to focus on the legally mandated meetings and other special education specialists on providing rigorous and quality instruction for our students in special education. An unintended benefit of the program was the impact it had on our school psychologists in particular. Today we have Dr. Carla Copeland Joseph from Pioneer here to share her experiences with our 2 case managers that are job sharing at Pioneer High School today.
Hi everyone. For me, the case management model was really good because I came in the middle of the school year. So I came into the district in October, in the middle of October as well. And you know, jokingly among the team, we say it's like baptism by fire, because you're coming in the middle of cases that are ongoing, new ones are coming in, and then you're coming into a totally new system. But because of the case management model, I had specific go-to persons that makes the managing of your job a lot easier, because they are the direct person who is working with the student and who is also working with the parent, and then by extension working with you and administration. So there is this, you know, core person or persons in my case that really manages the system, which is awesome. And then it also helps, as Chris would have mentioned, with working with families, because for our families, there is a direct person that they can relate an issue to, or of course relay a compliment as well. So that has worked really, really good for us, so that we are able to be on top of an issue because it comes directly to a case manager. It isn't going to a teacher and the teacher forgets, and then there is a delay, and then you have a very, very upset parent, or they have made a complaint to administration and it hasn't come to us. So it comes directly to our case managers. We can talk about it immediately, reroute it to administration if we need to. So there is this specific target model that has worked really, really successful. One, in integrating me, a new person, into an already existing system. And 2, really assisting families and parents with creating an environment where they feel heard and understood, because their needs are being met in a faster period of time.
Thank you, Dr. Copeland. A few lessons that we learned as a department and as a team is the 2 original case management sites, Gunderson and Ohlone. The case managers were actually the department heads, and their leadership within that department that had already been established were key factors in both of those programs being very successful in its first year. You know, in the schools that we have new members that were added into that case management role, we identified that that trainings around leadership and team building were really required in order for it to be successful. Even though it's not a step, like, it's a lateral move from being a special education teacher to this case management role, but there is this natural leadership piece to it that's necessary in order to lead the rest of the teachers and the support staff to ensure that families are feeling supported. Another area, in an effort to develop closer and more meaningful relationships with our family, it also became evident that we need to provide a more structured system around communicating with our families. This is due to families having kind of 2 points of contact regarding their child's special education needs. And so really being more systematic in how we expect our special education teacher and our case manager and how they communicate with our families. And lastly, similar to what Dr. Copeland Joseph was saying, the case management program has allowed us for first-year teachers, intern teachers, substitute teachers in some cases, to be able to really get acclimated with San Jose Unified's policies and procedures, and with an emphasis on becoming instructionally sound without the demands of the legally compliant IEPs and ever-changing special education law. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, and then just one last update from me too on the capacity building front. We obviously do a lot of trainings, professional developments for our staff to support all of these. But there's one particular focus we're going to have next year. When I presented last year, I shared with you about something called significant disproportionality, which is at its core is a compliance mandate from the state of California, but is for me an opportunity to improve our system and to strengthen the way we support a certain group of students. And so based on our data, the state does a calculation each year for all school districts in California of the percentage of students in each ethnic subgroup that are represented in each of the 13 qualifying disabilities in the state of California. And through some statistical work, they calculate what they call a risk ratio, and they identify if you are above it for any of the ethnic subgroups within a specific eligibility category. We have had nothing over the risk ratio for several years, with the exception of the over-identification of Hispanic students with a specific learning disability. So that particular subgroup and that particular eligibility. And so we spent a lot of time last spring, over this summer and this fall, meeting with a committee and developing a plan to address this, because there are real ramifications from the state if we do not address it. This significant disproportionality is part of the federal law IDEA that governs it, where states have to monitor this. And so there are things that could result in like withholding of funding, increased state monitoring if we're not able to address this. The good thing for us is that our risk ratio is just slightly higher. And we identified for us that Hispanic students in our district were really a proxy for English language learners. When we dug into the data and when we talked with staff to both look at the quantitative data, but also the qualitative data and what happens in practice each day in our schools, it really showed that our need is in students who are Hispanic but who are English language learners, because folks like Dr. Copeland have the unenviable and very challenging task, especially at our elementary schools, of trying to discern language acquisition from a learning disability. And it is a very complicated thing, and so I've been going to a lot of staff meetings with Director Powell this week to talk with our schools who are going to be working on this. And I lead with, this was not due to any malicious intent by anyone in our system. This was done with a genuine desire to help students, and those students have real needs. We just need to make sure those needs are being met with the correct supports. So what we'll be doing next year is focusing a lot on our pre-referral intervention process, our SST process, specifically for English language learners, bringing in experts to provide training to our staff, having increased monitoring of the frequency and duration of intervention prior to a referral to special education for our English language learners, and then also working with, as Dr. Copeland knows, our school psychologist team on the best practice assessments of multilingual learners, because there are some things that we can build into our system and actually already have, and we're doing it this year, and I'm really excited about the results we're seeing so far, to make the best decisions and have the best possible data. So that will be a big focus next year, and I'm really excited about it. It's a compliance thing, but it gives us an opportunity to really strengthen our system and really strengthen the way we support our students that are English language learners. And with that, thank you again for your time, and we will take any questions that you have.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for the robust presentation. I'll start to my left this time. Our student board member Fan, any questions on your side or comments?
So first off, thank you for the thorough presentation. I started with a lot of questions and you answered all of them so sufficiently, and so I'm so impressed. And also for just putting a lot of special focus on how each school has these different needs and how these different families as a whole also just need that communication and having someone to talk to and someone to both complain and compliment to. And so I only have 3 questions now, which was a very significant decrease. But first off, kudos to you guys and thank you so much. And second, with implementing all these new programs and all these different studies, is there any preparation for minimizing the learning curve for any new hirees for teachers or IAs to make sure that they come into it feeling prepared?
Yeah, I think I can start, and then anyone feel free to add. I think it's a great question, and something we talk about a ton, because we know that we need to make things as easy as possible to master quickly, or at least to master the basics of. Obviously, teaching is like anything, an iterative process of improvement. But the case management model that Chris described does allow for that by decreasing just the number of things teachers need to learn, or paraprofessionals too, on their first day. But also I think through making sure that we have curriculum in each of the courses and training to go with that. So for example, you might be a teacher who teaches just the TL2C curriculum that Mr. Dapadong described, where in the past you might have taught 3 or 4 different programs. And so really just decreasing it and keeping it focused and providing that training at the start of the school year, and then the ongoing support that Mr. Dapadong talked about as well.
I just wanted to add, at least what happens at Pioneer is that there is also pretty good mentorship. So for when new teachers are coming in, especially if they're coming into that specific discipline for the first time, they have been assigned different teacher mentors that help them to, you know, whether it's classroom management or simply just familiarizing with the curriculum or the delivery of the curriculum as well. So that tends to help also.
And then on the note of mentorship, both between coworkers and also between students and their case managers, when taking feedback, is it like data points of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well is this going? Or is it personal anecdotes happening? And if so, what's just the general feedback process like?
Yeah, I'm gonna look to Mr. Dapadong to give us his feedback on that.
I don't have. All right. So currently I am the case manager and the RSP teacher at the same time. So when I got here last year, I created progress monitoring form. And this is the form that I'm sharing with all of the Gen Ed teachers and support providers to share their feedback on the students' progress academically and behaviorally. And then I collate the information from them so that I can, you know, like create new goals for the students and report the progress to the parents. So I think it's, for me, this is a very valuable tool because every teacher can see what other teachers are like writing on that document. So I think we're always on the same page when it comes to IEP meeting.
Awesome. And that takes me to my final question of, based on each of the schools or just schools in general, what are like the specific racial or economic breakdowns for these students? Because we touched on it a bit earlier, but is it something significant or is it varying between each school? And if so, what is the connection between the socioeconomic or the racial aspects and then special ed and learning disability and the extra programs that are needed to prepare them?
Well, I think that the board probably wants me to wrap up like before 10 p.m. That is an incredibly insightful question that has such a long answer and so many factors. So I'm trying to leave you with something that it doesn't feel like I'm just completely dodging the question. But yeah, I mean, I think the ethnic makeup of our schools varies greatly from our downtown schools all the way down to Leland High School. And so, you know, it is important to take account of that, and I think the teachers do with the way they structure the curriculum. But yeah, it's a great question that has a lot of impact on the work that we do. That unfortunately just not enough time to even give you like a brief answer about it.
Thank you. And with that, thank you again for the presentation and also the responses. And that is all for me.
Trustee Collins.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your wonderful questions. I just want to thank you also for the thorough report. I do have just 2 of them, and one of them is sort of touching on what your last question, and I'm wondering if maybe we need a follow-up discussion space to kind of go deeper on some of the demographics and how that impacts service and the data, because I'd be very interested in hearing that. But on the slide that you had with the Latinos and special ed and the disproportionality that is still an issue, I'm wondering, do you look at gender with that, or do you have it broken down by gender, and is there a difference in gender?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did in our committee. So we had a committee that reviewed qualitative and quantitative data, and we kind of, we started with Hispanic students, drilled down, saw the difference in English language learners, and then we looked at some other factors, including gender. Within that subset, there wasn't a big difference in the gender breakdown, but those differences do show up in other data points. That specific part with the specific learning disability for Hispanic students, there wasn't a huge difference. The rate was slightly higher for males, but it wasn't something like significantly enough for us to tailor our entire plan just to male students.
Okay, thank you for that.
I certainly would be interested in another, like a study session on this,
Sure.
because it's really, it's fascinating, and it's incredible to see all the work that is being done, and I'd like to be able to speak better to that. My last question was around the case management, because it was really interesting to hear, and I'm wondering if the plan is eventually to have that at every campus, or is it by design at certain campuses, and what that design is?
Yeah, we would love to have it at every campus. I think the hard part is the structure of certain schools doesn't allow for the natural transition for it. So the schools that it's currently at typically have more programs, more teachers, so it's easier to disperse like the kids amongst all the teachers. You know, a program like at Leland High School, there's only 2 RSP teachers. And so if I pull one to do a case management, then there's only one RSP teacher to provide the instruction. So, and similarly at Willow Glen Middle School, I don't think it would ever work just because the numbers don't. And at the elementary level, typically it's just one RSP at one school site. And so those are the school sites that we're still trying to brainstorm, like how can we put this model at those locations? But right now we're just kind of limited in like how the instruction can be provided to the kids, because that, in our minds, that's the most important piece of it, and then the IEP piece of it is just the unfortunate reality.
Thank you, that really is all of my questions.
Thank you. Trustee Wheatley.
Thank you. Phenomenal presentation. Just a few minor questions. In fact, a couple of them were taken care of, and then a couple of observations. So tell me again, I think I wrote it down correctly, TL2C, but I totally lost what it stands for.
Yeah, think, lead, create curriculum. So
Okay.
our vision is prepare our students to be the thinkers, leaders, and creators of tomorrow. So we've got some very smart branding people in our department.
I like it.
That came up with that.
I like it. Early on in a couple of the slides, it was dealing with the instructional assistants. There was an asterisk. Is that to indicate that that's a stressor point, or did it mean something else?
It was a typo.
That's good too. I won't.
I noticed it this afternoon, I changed it, but I don't think that was the version that got here.
It's nice being my age, because it's already gone. I don't even remember answering the question, so it's good. Speaking of which, I can totally relate, because I'm not gonna tell you what year I started, but I started in November. And I was expected to know everything, and I didn't know much of anything. You're amazing, I'm sure, but I was making up as I went along. Speaking of that, kind of my history, and by the way, I just love the case management program idea, because I saw what didn't work where I was. But one of the things that was so cool, and I probably have shared this story, also a function of being a little bit older, because I love to tell stories, is I had the opportunity, because I worked quite closely with the RSP teacher at the time, and always told her if she needed to mainstream somebody, come and talk to me. So we actually worked together one year where I had all of the RSP students in my class. She came in and we team taught, and then she pulled out kids with higher needs for a portion of the day. Hardest teaching year of my career. I learned so much that year, and just based on that, at whatever point it's appropriate, would love to see that pushing program you were talking about around the science and social studies, because it really speaks to me. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Wheatley. Trustee Castellanos.
Great presentation. I love meeting more of the team, because I think that team is what makes work exciting, and team is what makes hard work sustainable. Because when you're repeating it over and over again and you can't get to where you need to get because there isn't a team, it gets really hard. And even though we specialize in things, the team itself can produce great ideas, so I just love this part. I love the presentation. It was a great presentation. I do have some specific questions. The case management thing to me sounds brilliant. As a parent, to have one person consistently that I talk to about my child's issues is transformative, and even trust building. And I think a lot of times there's been so much hurt with the student, with the parent, that there's a lot of resentment, and that's like one of the big issues we need to get over with when we're dealing with special ed issues. So I think that's just great, and the faster we can repeat some version of it or some way of it in all our schools, I think that will be the best, because I think the goal of this is to get our students to the point where they just get to be kids. and they just get to learn, and they just get to grow, and everyone has their own time. So I think that, I see like the light at the end of the tunnel, of where we can be, and obviously this is an issue that the whole country is dealing with, that the whole state is dealing with, and figuring out ways that make it work, I think is really important. I do have some questions. So how are we engaging parents? Because obviously that's your biggest partner, number one. And then number two, how are we engaging Spanish-speaking parents?
Yeah, I think you're right exactly on the importance of that. I think a couple of things. I actually don't think about it as really separate from the efforts that we do for school communities broadly, right? The school is really the center of, that parent's relationship, and we want all of the outreach to be inclusive and targeted to those parents of students with and without IEPs, and in whatever form those students take. I think really, the thing Chris touched on with the structured communication, I think too, is like really important. Is this is one of Chris's mantras, but if the first time you're talking to a parent is in an IEP, it's probably not going to go well. And so you need to have been talking to them. And again, nothing with malicious intent, but it's an overwhelming job, especially if you're new to it. You step in, you have so many things to do. A couple weeks can go by, and then a month can go by, and you may need to send that parent an email. You may need to give them a call, tell them about how you saw their student doing something great on campus. And so I think just being a little more focused with us on giving guidance and reminders around like, hey, like, have you checked in with each of your parents by this date? Here's a rough guide. We actually just had a meeting talking about, kind of a rough guide for like mapping out the school year. So like, what's some things to share in August or in September with your families? What's some things to share in October? To give people kind of a guide if they don't know what to do, other than just like talking about the schoolwork. There's some other things that I think we can share and really build that trusted relationship.
Agreed, because the relationship should just be, and this is where your child is held, but also this is where your child is growing.
Yeah.
And this is the exciting thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and I didn't answer you with the Spanish speaking. I mean, we're fortunate enough, a lot of our schools, some of our case managers in the case manager model speak Spanish, are able to engage with families. But we did an investment in Language Line, which Director Maddox, thank you very much for your help with that. Where it's a phone translation service, and I'm sure Rosal was taking a breath somewhere in relief. But our case managers can just pick up the phone, call the line, have a Spanish interpreter on, call the parent right away, and it has really been game changing for our non-Spanish speaking staff who need to interact with parents regularly. It just took away all the friction from how we were doing things previously.
So then the other part of that question for me is great communication, love it. What about the parent that doesn't know how the system works, doesn't know how to ask for help, doesn't know what even exists in the realm of special ed, is a Spanish speaking parent, and maybe thinks it's about language, but it's about language and something else, and learning in a different way.
So I like to tell a lot of stakeholders who I work with, our outcomes and results that we have in terms of our level of customer service and attentiveness and communication, it should not depend on the knowledge that a parent brings to that interaction, that we should bring that same level of customer service and attention to all of our families, regardless of their inherent knowledge of the system. And I think one thing that we're super passionate about as a department is how can we make what we do, which is necessarily based on laws and ed code and acronyms, how do we make that more accessible to our parents? And in terms of how we're doing that, we're working with our school psychologists. How do we make their results meaningful and accessible to people who don't have knowledge and information? And then in terms of things like our SST process, the goal, I participate in that at multiple days throughout the year, and the goal of that system is really, we want to be proactively identifying students, not as you're a student that necessarily has a disability immediately, but certainly you're a student that could benefit from a number of different tools that we have available in San Jose Unified. intervention support, right? ELD support, counseling support. There's lots of ways that we can proactively message that out, not just to the San Jose Unified stakeholders, like the general education teachers and the principals, but also that is a vehicle through which we can proactively communicate with parents. So I would say we're very, very focused on that, and I think that we've already come a long way in terms of the pendulum swinging away from mile-long reports and really focused on how do we make this accessible and meaningful to a parent regardless of the knowledge of the special education system that they have.
I love that. But I also think that the way we're set up as schools, that if you cannot advocate for your child, it may take a lot longer than necessary to get your child's needs met. And I'll say that because I was a mother of a special ed student, and yes, it was 20 years ago, so of course things have changed. But we didn't figure it out till 6th grade, and teachers did know. And we figured it out, and the good thing was she had a good attitude towards school, and her pain was not so huge that she could overcome still at 6th grade. But I'm worried about the kids who cannot get that access, the parents who kind of know something and don't know enough about the structure to be able to access it. And I'm wondering if we would benefit with conversations with the Mexican consulate, because they have staff that only work on education. And I kind of feel like they must get a lot of questions about the education system here, because part of it also is language. So it's a layered thing, and I'm just trying to figure out how do we bring more resources, and how do we bring more understanding, and how do we bring more movement? Because we live in Silicon Valley, and so we're competing with students or community leaders, parents that have double masters and double PhDs, and they all physically live in the same place. And then we're dealing with our students, and when I look at our Latino outcomes, they're not great Latino outcomes. They're still challenging Latino outcomes. So my question is, well, what are the special ed needs that we're still not meeting? Because there's needs there that we're not meeting. And so and I'm excited by the conversation. I'm excited by the enthusiasm. I'm not critiquing where you're at. I'm critiquing where we're at, and where we still need to go. So just that, and that kind of, when I've seen it take place in the our parent university, family university, whatever we call it, I see the engagement of parents wanting to learn, and so I just want us to always tap into the knowledge that parents also bring to the table.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, we often say parents are the expert, right?
Yeah.
Parents are the expert on their kid, so yeah.
Yeah, so I'm excited of the work, I'm excited we're moving towards, I'm excited of the team that is moving this as a block. But we have a lot to do still, so thank you so much, gratitude for where it's going.
Yeah, thank you for the robust presentation. I appreciate each and one of you for your service to what you're doing, because I know it's not easy work. Thinking about the case management component as a former kinder and first grade teacher, I'm like, oh, that would be so amazing. Just thinking of the extra work that goes in it, because you don't want to be wrong, right? There's a lot of consequences if you don't do things correctly, not just legally, but for the benefit of that child. So I appreciate that, and again, as a former early elementary teacher, here in the early intervention is wonderful. Appreciate my colleagues for asking some of the questions I did have in place, and do want to name for you all too. I just appreciate you naming areas of opportunity or growth. I know that isn't easy always, but to say this is an area we're working at, this is what we're going to do, I think is the right step for our community to know that we are working hard on this. Some questions I have. How often do we reevaluate our targets? Is it yearly, quarterly? Apologies if I missed this. I think it was like the 3-year target.
No, yeah. So, I mean, these ones were, the pandemic threw a wrench in kind of what we were doing, and so this was a chance last year to reset and think about, it's really challenging because, like I said, there's so many factors that influence these data, but these are the things that are often publicly reported very publicly on the school dashboard and are used in our calculations. And so there is no specific answer to your question because it's just set by us as a leadership team. Yeah, so we're gonna look at these for 3 years, and then I think, a lot of these are going to require focus beyond that. And so if we feel we need to adjust them after next year, we will. and if not, we'll continue chugging along against those.
Thank you. And these next questions are, it's kind of into, are we seeing an increase in IEPs or SPED cases as a whole just due to the pandemic and the impacts that we may have seen of distance learning?
Yeah, it's a question that I have been very curious about too. So we saw a big increase in initial evaluation requests last year in grades that we haven't typically seen. We do a pretty good job in our system of identifying students who have needs in the elementary school and assessing them for special education. When 2 of those years we don't see them when they're young, then they get to middle school, there was just a huge increase there. Our percentage overall has stayed somewhat consistent between 11, 12, 13%. 13% is definitely a little bit above where it's been the past few years, but I think a few years ago we were at 14% for a brief period of time. So the overall population hasn't grown, but the significance of the needs of the students who do have IEPs has definitely increased, especially from a behavioral standpoint at the younger years.
And do we see that leading, and we had some staffing data up there, to an increase of need of staffing, and any idea of kind of where we are now with the upcoming school year?
In terms of staffing?
Yeah.
It leads to an increase mainly in the need for instructional associates. And so when we need to have a person with a student full-time, that does obviously add a position. Has stayed relatively, there's been a slight increase in our position since the pandemic. Yeah, and then also, Chris, always rely on him, but obviously our need for counseling has definitely grown. Just flat out grown since we came back to school in person, pretty significantly, and it's great that we've been able to provide additional services to a lot of those students. And then for next year, yeah, we're looking great. I think you'll get an update at the start of the year. Next year, we're looking great on the related service provider and psychologist front. Teachers, I think we're in a good spot, better than we are usually this time of year, but I am still anxious, obviously, about where we'll end up in the fall.
It's great to hear that we are not scrambling. It's been said.
It's a controlled, disciplined scramble.
Okay, it's a personal, I'm just being petty right now, sorry. What do we foresee as our biggest challenge ahead of us, and what do you think we could do as a board? I know that there's been asked for board members to advocate at the federal level to increase funding, things like staffing. Is there anything we can do as a board to support with some of the challenges that we see ahead of us?
Yeah, that's another one we could probably talk about for a long time. I think obviously the increase in funding, it's still an unfunded mandate from the federal government, so that's always going to be a need. I think for me personally, what I've seen that we can do locally in California is to really encourage our legislatures to think about the quality of the credentialing programs for our staff, specifically teachers, but also school psychologists, so that when students in those programs finish, they're more prepared to do the extremely challenging work that's ahead of them, because we do see that that's a big need. We often have to spend a lot of time retraining and really teaching, sometimes for the first time, some pretty foundational concepts. And so I think that would be the one big thing that would be my ask.
Awesome, that's all I have. My colleagues, anything else, any comments, questions?
I just want to add one final thing. We've done a lot of work, student services and special ed have worked together, thinking about these students that have these extreme needs and how can we support them prior to ending up in with an IEP. So when we're thinking about behaviors, when we're thinking about the extreme emotional impact. So we have been doing some work, some piloting, and trying to really think about how we can provide those supports. Because if we can teach them how to handle those strong feelings, respond when something doesn't go their way in a way that's appropriate, then we believe that they won't need the more confined or more restrictive environment in a special education classroom. So that's something we're still working on. We recognize it's an area of need, and of course that does also entail high quality, experienced staff who know how to address those behaviors.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions, comments? Okay, thank you again for all the hard work you're doing. You have a lot of hard work in front of us, but thank you for everything you do. Okay.